Welcome to another episode of Engaging Personalities. My name is Anders Belanger. I'm founder and CEO of Engagify. And today we have a speaker, media consultant, author of the book, Storytelling for Business, and a neighbor of mine. Please welcome to the show, Rob Wozny. Rob, welcome.
Anders, thanks for having me on. I've watched I listen to your podcast. I watch all the stuff that you do online. Big fan of just watching what you do, and I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think it's such a great fit. And I'm like storytelling, when we teach and coach people, we talk about, engagement. Storytelling is like the great equalizer, like a well-told story, people just can't help themselves getting sucked right into it. And if we want people to pay attention to our brand, to our message, how we can help people, they gotta tap into storytelling. So this is a perfect fit. And from my experience working with companies for trade shows and messaging, and I've expressed this to you before, they often talk about our story. And it's really just a bunch of bullet points. Like it's not really a story. So can you kind of share with us, like what is your definition of storytelling with that business angle?
Yeah, certainly there are many definitions, and there's certainly many different perspectives. But certainly from my perspective, I think a great business story, a compelling business story, has elements that connect the organization or business to the people that matter the most to the success of their operations, their organization, day to day, what they do. And that's done through compelling storytelling elements, such as real people. We talk about that in the book. What does real people? Real people are the people who are directly impacted by the products and services or initiatives that your organization and business are responsible for. So really capturing the elements that showcase what real people are and how they're impacted, and how your products and services solve problems, or create a different path to making sure that their lives are better as a result of consuming your content through your story and connecting to your products and services, or perhaps something that you're influencing.
So that people element that you're talking about, Rob, is that, I know that's something rehumanizing or just humanizing business again. Is that kind of the secret sauce of storytelling too? Just that connection with the people?
Yeah, it's. I think you're bang on, Anders, and I think though there's a bit of a fine line, because I think if you go too far, I think your viewers or people who are consuming your content think, okay, maybe they're stretching a little bit too far. So it's finding that balance between that human aspect with real people, but understanding that people who are consuming the storytelling of your business are also there for a reason. They want to see how your products and services are going to make their lives better, or solve a problem, or they've come to your organization's storytelling content to learn more about an initiative that's close to them. So finding that balance, I think, is really key in very progressive and engaging storytelling for business.
So when you say going too far, Rob, like, can you give me an example? Like, can you jump the shark in terms of being too, I don't know, too much of a storyteller, or can you kind of put a finer point on that for me?
Yeah, I think, from a perspective of perhaps going too far, I certainly won't give examples, but I think anyone can think of them as perhaps going too far with your storytelling, in the sense by, pushing out content all the time, in the sense of this one story. If you nail it in the sense of, hey, you've told a great story and you've got lots of engagement, you don't want to push it too far, in the sense you don't want to water it down. Like, if you've got a hit, stick with it, but make sure you've got a nice balance. And if anything, you want to repurpose it. So take a great story. Let's say you produce a very compelling video story. Well, perhaps you want to repurpose it, take those clips and add it to your podcast as part of your podcast, repurpose it into a web page story, or maybe there's some graphics you can use for your social media. That's a better treatment than perhaps trying to create multiple series on one story, when really one aspect of the story will be sufficient enough to engage with the people that matter the most to the success of your organization.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Now, when people are looking to tell stories for their business, what are some of the mistakes they're making, or what are the misconceptions that they have on what they need to do? Like, what are they doing wrong out there?
Well, from what I see, and certainly the experience that I've had, is that it's this understanding that their stories have this some level of objectivity, when really it is subjective in the sense, like there is, when you're producing storytelling for your business, there is an objective, and there it is subjective in the sense that you are trying to achieve something, which is, again, to educate the people who watch your content, to if you're trying to sell a product or sell a service, or again influence people to take a specific action. So there is some subjectivity to it, in that you are trying to influence people to take a certain direction through those streams of content. So I think that sometimes is the sometimes that gets a little bit off track, that hey, this story is going to be completely objective and everyone's going to see it for just this wonderful story. But the truth is that sometimes organizations shy away from, hey, like there really is a bottom line objective to what we're trying to do here. So and there is value, right, Anders? There is value in telling your customers what your product is doing, what your service is doing, what you're trying to influence through an initiative, because that's ultimately why they're there. And I think it's just understanding what those objectives are in your storytelling content should be the focal point before you really dig into, hey, the great elements of telling a fantastic story.
Right. So there's that strategy has to be there in the first place, right? That the objectives that you're saying. Because as you're talking about that, it was making me think about, some of these maybe more ad campaigns, but there's story elements in there where people miss the mark, right? And the tone was off or whatever. And it was almost kind of like trying to get press for press sake, as opposed to having that, I don't know, like a backbone or something to really support that kind of endeavor or that outreach. I was going through your book, and one of the things that we come across a lot too is that you said something about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and I think as marketers, as business owners, as whatever capacity you're in, I think a lot of people aren't confident or comfortable with being the storyteller. Can you speak to that and how people might be able to get comfortable?
Well, it's a great question, Anders, and why it's so fitting that you asked that question is because it's happening right now, live in front of us. For you, for example, if you were to take a step back and your audience was to look at your set, you'd have lights and all the tools and technology. And it took you a while to get proficient. And by the way, Anders is probably one of the best people I know when it comes to all the tools and gadgets for doing interviews in this space and beyond. But what's important to note about that is that you took the time to invest in learning how to do that, and you took the time to get the equipment. That's not easy space. Sometimes that's really uncomfortable, just learning how to do that, learning how to work with the equipment and practicing it. Then once you've kind of got that mastered, then it's actually putting yourself in front of a camera. And whether it's my experience working in the media or working with the media or working in corporate communications or being a content producer, that is one of the most challenging aspects of being a storyteller, is to step in front of a camera and to be that storyteller. It's a really challenging thing to do. And that's where the uncomfort is. But, is if you continue to lean into it and just practice it and do it more and more. Like, for example, I'm new in this space, or I'm new again to this space, as it were. And again, it's constantly just pushing yourself to do it. But even for me, it's a challenge just to get comfortable in this space. And like you, Anders, you've been doing this for quite some time in this live video space, and your comfort level and your engagement looks fantastic. But I think you'd be the first to admit that took some practice, and again, getting comfortable in your environment with the tools and technology. So that's really what it means about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. Right. Again, here I've got bright lights in front of me. That's not a normal, natural environment. So it's just, again, practicing that, getting comfortable with it, because normally it's not a natural environment. But the more you do it, the more you practice it, the more proficient you get at it. It becomes less intimidating, and then you get to focus more on the engaging and the interactive parts of this this storytelling for business world. And in this case, it's live streaming video.
Yeah. So it's just, leaning into it, the mere exposure to it, just getting used to it. Something you mentioned there earlier just made me think, are there in your dealings with businesses and associations and, all kinds of entities, are there, founders, and I always find founders have passion. So they're
Yes.
great as the storyteller, right? Like they just come, but there's lots of businesses out there that need to tell their stories, but are they lacking storytellers? And is that kind of a place where you help companies as well?
For sure, and that's a great point to mention, Anders. And that's certainly that certainly seems to be a conception that your best business storyteller is always going to be your leader, and that's not necessarily the case. And sometimes it can be a bit of a detriment, again, depending on the issue or the story that you're trying to tell. But I think what's really important, when I start working with organizations, I kind of do what's sort of a storyteller audit, kind of work with the organization or the business to say, okay, who are your storytellers? Because, for example, let's say you're working with, I don't know, let's like a not-for-profit or a charity who has a lot of opportunities to leverage great storytellers, whether that's, volunteers, whether it's donors, whether it's the people who benefit from the services of those organizations. And really understanding, hey, who's out there and what medium or mediums do they really work well in? And then identifying them and training them, because really they're they can be the most impactful storytellers of business, opposed to, and again, nothing against a leader all the time, but they're not boots on the ground, so to speak, or they're not intimately involved with the programs and services. Let's say a program manager is, or a coordinator or a service provider, or again, someone who is impacted directly by the service or the initiative that the organization is working on. So that's the distinction, is taking a good look at who your storytellers are, identifying them, seeing what their strengths are, and then training them, right? Again, we talked about being in this space, right? You wouldn't want to take someone who has a great story to tell, who let's say was a volunteer or a customer, and just throw them in front of a camera. You want to make sure that they're trained and they have a comfort level of being in front of the camera, and also developing messaging and really setting them up for success in this storytelling for business environment that we're in today, for example, Anders.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you have a background in media. You went to school, I imagine, for doing that sort of thing. So you had all that kind of practice and exposure. And I just want to, with that background of getting messages out there and kind of seeing the angle, right? Like, and I think that's where other people sometimes need help too, right? They don't see the story that they have. Do you have any suggestions for people for kind of like, I don't know, getting that objectivity or being able to kind of, I don't know, find their story? Does that make sense, Rob? Like,
oh yeah, it does make sense, and Anders, and I truly believe that no matter what size the organization or business, everyone truly has a story to tell. It's just identifying like what are those important elements of what makes a great business story. So, for example, if you've got a really cool, innovative product and it shows well, like let's say it's something you can demonstrate with your hands, there's a really cool opportunity to perhaps bring in the publicity angle where you engage the media, or you go on your social channels and you create content around that. But it's really understanding like what shows and tells well, and then again, what people help support that, like who are the people in your business that can really speak to that product or service or to that initiative better than anyone in a way that's very passionate. I mean, you talked about earlier about how co-founders and founders are very passionate about the organization that they created, but so are the people that help them be successful along the way. And it's important, like, don't discount those along the way who've been on that journey with you. Sometimes suppliers can make great storytellers of your business. They've got a unique perspective. I've even heard those in the financial industry who've stepped up to say, hey, we funded this organization because we felt their passion. We want to be a part of it. So it's really understanding, Anders, what is it that you're trying to achieve with your storytelling first and foremost, before you even engage in sort of creating a path to get you from here to there with your storytelling, is really understanding what is it we're trying to do. And I'd even say take a step further back by aligning it with the objectives of the business. Because again, as I've said earlier, that this is all about business. It's storytelling for business. There is an objective here. There is, you are trying to achieve something, and the storytelling is helping you along that journey. So it's understanding, again, what the business is trying to achieve and how you can weave that into your storytelling in still an authentic and engaging way.
And I just put up a comment that we got a little bit ago, but you were coming back to that, getting goal-oriented, objective-oriented, and that's where, it seems to have to be born out of. I'm really familiar with the hero's journey, and my son loves the hero's journey too, because of course Star Wars and all of the things that it builds into. But even when he plays with his toys, he understands the struggle, you know what I mean, and the setbacks, which makes it all the better. So in terms of telling, storytelling for business, I'm maybe you could just go over a hero's journey just briefly, just so people understand that. But what other structures do we need to consider, or what do we need to know to tell our stories?
Yeah, hero's journey is certainly one of the more popular storytelling structures because it's so common. It's very simple. It's so, for example, your customer goes on a journey and they leave, they go on these adventures. They can't find what they're looking for. They face setbacks, and then they go through some transition because they picked up your product or they're benefiting from your service. So they come back a different person. So they kind of go on this route. And that's sort of the transition in which they make. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but again, what I'm trying to get across here is that you can take these storytelling structures and use them because they're tried and true, because they work, but use them in your business. So see where your storytellers fit on the archetype of some of these structures. A great place to see all kinds of storytelling structures, even outside of business, applied to business, is a place like our streaming services, like Netflix. Just finished watching the latest episodes of Stranger Things with my teenage daughters, and just watching all the storytelling structures going in there. So for example, start with the end. They start with this incredible conclusion, they cut it off, and then they kind of backtrack and take you how they got there. So start with the end. So maybe again, that's a storytelling structure.
I always call that Tarantinoing it. Quentin Tarantino used to do that a lot.
Yeah. So, but don't be afraid to have that creativity to try that in your business storytelling, because again, you as an organization or business know your products and services and the people that are in it better than anyone. So, hey, maybe we can try something we saw on that. But again, just make sure, as we talked about earlier, when you're talking about that ability to be authentic and genuine, is that you do want to remember that this is storytelling for your business. It's not necessarily a Stranger Things or any other sort of typical independent film for that matter. This is a storytelling for business, and there are objectives, and there's reasons for why you're doing it behind it as well too.
Yeah, it is for business, and it reminds me a little bit of my background in entertainment, show business. Shows 4 letters, business is 8. There is that emphasis on that objective of the storytelling. You have a background in media, Rob, and I'm just curious, for people getting their stories out. I mean, I think classically, press releases and going to classical media. Can you kind of talk about, what are the ways people are getting their message out in terms of media in this digital age?
Well, in this digital age, Anders, it's become increasingly more difficult. I think if you look at just read the headlines, especially perhaps over the last couple of decades in particular, in the last decade in particular, there's a lot of truncation of major media companies and media organizations. They're being absorbed by large conglomerates, or they're disappearing altogether. So it's becoming increasingly difficult to get that kind of media coverage that was once there before. So if you're going to enter in this space by engaging the media to amplify or help tell the story of your business, you really need to do your research, and you need to do it well, because if you don't, I guarantee you there's some other business organization that is doing it. And guess who's going to get the coverage and get the opportunity is the one who is taking that time to research. So again, when I talk about research, like understanding, when you're looking at a news outlet and you think, okay, which reporter would best fit the kind of story I'm talking about? Look at their interests. Like most media reporters are, they've got Twitter channels and they've got feeds. So you can see this long archive of the stories that they cover. So you can kind of see a fit. That creates an entry point to say, hey, I see you cover travel and entertainment. I've got this cool story. And understanding how to reach those those members of the media. Some of them prefer to have direct contact through their direct messaging on social media, or whether it's email. So it's really important, Anders, to do your research and understand before you start making those pitches who you're pitching to and what kind of stories they like to tell. As sort of just a starting point. There's so much more to say on this.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a whole book that people can read about all of this, right? And while we're talking about businesses who want to tell a story, what do you think? What's a way that they can kind of get started? I mean, obviously they can talk to you, robwozny.com. I'll put up your website here in a bit. But what are ways that people can they go like, okay, storytelling, it's hot, it's in business, I need to do it, but where do you start? Like,
I certainly recommend, and it's even before calling in, someone like me or someone else to kind of help you along this path, is just kind of getting the folks around your table, whether it's your leaders or those who you have a strong, trusting network with, and just to say, what are our most compelling stories of our business or organization? Like, what are we doing? What's resonating with our stakeholders, and how do we shape that into a story? It doesn't take long, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to really understand, like, hey, this customer, sent an email to us, said that, our product made a huge difference in their life and it made things better for them. Or, as a not-for-profit, our service helped so-and-so. So it's just, again, doing that storytelling audit. You can do that at a very basic level. And then again, you can, you can work with the professionals to expand that out. Okay, now that you've identified those stories, let's flush them out a little bit more. Let's look at the elements to support that. And then kind of look at the channels of communication to tell those stories in a more profound and in a way that makes an impact, and engaging with people through various channels of communication.
Awesome. I flipped it up here. I'll just pop it up again here. So we've got Rob Wozny. That's the best place to check you out there, right? robwozny.com.
Right. Yeah, as mentioned in the book, and you know this as well too, Anders. Your website is your primary business storytelling tool, and it kind of like a webs out and webs in, right? It connects to your social media and back again. But the great thing about, as you know, from a website, from a storytelling standpoint, is that you have such great control of the content and the flow, and it just gives you such an opportunity to showcase all the great stories and great information that you do in the storytelling for business realm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for being able to join us on this. I know I'm going to be, getting the link to this and sharing this out, because I feel like it's an I don't know if you call it a tool. I don't know, like format, I don't know, but for businesses to just harness. They just like data dumping these days instead of, actually dressing things up. And actually, before I let you go, let me talk about that. What is it about stories that make, that communication of a message so memorable and so sticky? Like that's one of the advantages of storytelling, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about that in the book, Anders, that there is sort of this emotional connection from the brain and the heart, that connect with stories. And I think that is, as you alluded to at the beginning of the interview, is just that, connecting and creating story in a genuine and authentic way will help make that connection to your brand and to your product or service by introducing that, that certain element of storytelling. If you're distinctly just saying, okay, here's our product and service, the storytelling shows the difference. I keep saying it, but I think it's the point that makes the most sense, in the sense that you're telling the story, whether it's through, a customer who's had a remarkable experience, like your product or service has changed their life or made their life better in some profound way, all because of your product or service. You tell that story, and that in and of itself is marketing and telling the product, saying how this works, right? But you're doing it through someone else's experience, opposed to, let's say, just the company or the organization saying, here's how great our product and service is. It's like, no, we're going a step further. We're letting a customer or a volunteer or someone else who has invested their time and energy and resources to what we do to tell how great the service or products and what we do. I think that's the distinction.
And that's such a great point, Rob, because and you know this from your speaking colleagues and everything too, that speakers can sometimes be guilty of telling a story about how good they are or what they've done. And especially as Canadians, I think there's a part of us that shudders, right? That right. that kind of it doesn't have that angle or that detachment. And what you were saying is, telling it through someone else's eyes, it then kind of reframes things. So when I think about the hero's journey and that side of things, you want to make your customer the hero, right? And build them up and make them look good, as opposed to being the hero as the company, as the savior. You're just you're the guide. You're the Obi-Wan Kenobi to their Luke Skywalker, right?
Absolutely, and you've nailed it. And that's the point, within the book, to identify some of these storytelling structures, to say exactly that. Look at these tried and true structures and say, like, where does my customer, where does the stakeholder that I want to showcase prominently in my business storytelling, what's their journey on this archetype or this narrative? And these structures, again, hero's journey is certainly one of the more common ones. And you can sort of chart the path of, they start here and they took a dip here and they ended up here, transformed for the better, all because of your product or service or what you're trying to do as an organization.
Awesome. And I think that's a great way to end it. Get organized about what is that objective, and then start looking at the stories that you can tell in the right way to be able to get your message across. Rob, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Anders, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.